I was told don't worry about your art style, that it will eventually come. Don't even think about it. Your art style will find you instead of you finding it. Although this is partially true, there are some things that you can do in order to find your art style faster. And the last tip that I'm going to be talking about is the most important one, but it is the one that we ignore the most. But first, what are we trying to do when we're trying to find our art style? What makes someone's art style their style? There are some obvious ones when we look at something that this is a unique style, but there are some other ones that you really have to think about to figure out what makes it their style. For example, when we look at Pixar, we can see very clean 3D rendering, the big eyes, the small nose, and we can see that when we look at it, that is unique to Pixar. Another example is Arcane. We really see it and we look at the shape language, we see the painterly look, and we see that you play with shapes is very prominent in the style. Same with Spider-Verse. We see it, we see the sketch lines, again, shape language, and we see some things that they use with, for example, chromatic aberration or halftone effect that really makes it their style. But there are some other things that are not as obvious that makes someone's style unique. So some things to consider, for example, is color saturation. For example, if we look at Samda's art versus Nixu's art, we can see that Samda's art is a lot more saturated and Nixu's art is more in the desaturated area. Obviously, there's a lot more to their style, but this is just example of color saturation. Other things are play with proportion and angles, realistic proportions. For example, the art from Christoph or Eric Knott versus some of these things from South Park or Graffiti Studio, where we can see very stylized in the way they do the shapes and the angles and the proportions. The other one is depth and shading. How is depth shown? For example, if we look at some anime style paintings, we see, for example, Genshin Impact here, the shading and the depth is shown very subtly and it's not very, detailed rendering when it comes to the way it's rendered, and it's mostly cell shading, or maybe not even cell shading, really subtle changes in color. While we look at something, for example, this painting of Katarina from League of Legends, we can see how much the light and shadow is always changing to show the form of the shape in a more realistic way. Other one is a brush stroke. So we can see, for example, Luish, the way she uses her brush strokes, and they're very visible there in a lot of places, and the way it's done versus these paintings from Zed. Parts of it is, the brush strokes are not very visible and rendered more finely, and other places the brush strokes are left in there. So that makes the style the way it is. Other things to consider is line art. Is it even there or is it not there? For example, Ergo Josh, these drawings are all line art and it makes it the way it is, versus we look at these ones from Inkwell, there's almost no line art at all and it's just painting. There are so many other things to consider when we're analyzing an art style, but these are just a few examples. So what can we actually do to find our art style and pursue it actively? So the first thing that I did was try and find a few artists that you really admire and you really are inspired by. At least choose 3 or 4. The more you choose, the better, I believe. And you can even combine some of the styles together. So for example, if you like Disney or Pixar art style, you can combine it together. It doesn't need to be a specific artist. It could be a style of a studio or something like, for example, League of Legends. If you really like League of Legends art style, that also can be grouped together. Now make sure you do select a few, because if there is a big danger in just choosing 1 or 2, because if you do that and if you limit yourself to that, then your art style will just be a copy of them. You will not really find your own voice, and whatever you're studying, whatever you're trying to do will just be a replica of that artist that you like. And I see this sometimes, with popular artists, for example, like Samda's art, he has a very unique art style, and a lot of people really admire his art. So we'll see some people just start studying his art style only, and then they start replicating it, and then their art style just looks like a copy of Samda's art. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that in particular, but what I'm trying to say is that if you only choose one artist to, that you aspire or are inspired from, then your art style would just be a copy of them and you won't find your own art style. So in my case, I had selected, Ross Strauss, Sam Does Art, Wolope, Guiz, a few League of Legends artists. And from there, I would just start looking at a few illustrations from them that I really admire so that I can really start analyzing it and studying it. So now when I'm looking at it, I try and think about what is it that I actually like about this painting that I'm looking at and analyzing. Trying to figure out what are the things that I like about it. And this is why we're really selecting a bunch of illustrations from them. And one thing that I think is important is that, our art style is always evolving. And so would our references, and so would our inspirations. So it's okay that if you have, for example, 5 artists or 5, groups of artists that you really like, and then maybe in a few years you add to it. For example, when I first started, I had those artists, then Arcane came out, I was really inspired by it, and then Spider-Verse, really inspired by it, so I started studying those afterwards as well. So let's take a look at a few examples of how am I actually studying these and what am I looking for when I'm analyzing the painting. For example, let's start with the first one. I was looking at Ross Strauss, I really like the coloring or the colors that he uses, the rendering, the way he does the eyes, bigger eyes. Sam Does Arts, I really like the simplicity in brushstrokes. One thing that he does is bigger eyes and smaller noses. So that's something that I learned from that, although maybe I didn't really take everything from him, but it's something that I was studying. When I was looking at Wolope, I really like the rendering techniques that he does, the semi-realism with the painterly mix. He does really detailed areas and then he does areas that are not detailed at all, and the combination makes the painting the way it is. I was looking at Guiz. It's really interesting and amazing how Guiz uses light and shadow to just tell a story and show a mood. You can always see that contrast. Lots of the paintings are dark, and then there is a specific part of it that has light and really grabs your attention towards that area. Obviously, I was really inspired by League of Legends art, character posing and splash art, the way they use values and colors and emphasizing the pose, the rendering and the details. Really had to study that a lot. Spider-Verse, again, and Arcane, the painterly look that they both have, and the inclusion of line art in both of them. Sometimes you can see that in especially in Spider-Verse, that the line art is there, or the sketch line, even not even clean line art. The sketch lines are left in the paintings. So now, after really, looking at these and analyzing it, it's not really enough to do that. It's actually really good to do studies of them. And when we're doing the studies, to really focus on the things that we've analyzed and we like. And I think there's a lot of value in this. And I really, did this quite a bit at some point. And it's good to also even post these things. But remember, if you post these things and these studies, always make sure that you credit the artist and you say that it is a study, because you don't want to be taking credit for something that is not yours and something that is not your idea or your painting, and it is just a study. And some of these artists, post their processes on YouTube and you can really watch and follow their steps. For example, Sam Does Art does a lot, posts a lot, Ross Strauss, you can watch their videos. Even Wolope has process videos and he has, a sped up version of his paintings where you can take a look and start to analyze the process and the step process that they take, because not only analyzing the painting is important, but analyzing the process that they use will help you understand the style and how they achieve the style. Sometimes analyzing just by ourselves can be difficult. So some of these artists even have, courses or Patreon. So it's good to, if you want to really invest, to even do that and learn from them directly. For example, Ross Strauss has the Digital Art Bootcamp. Or many artists even have Patreon, so you can directly learn from them. But the other thing that you can do, and something that I did, is get a mentorship from, or even advice from, an artist that is more skilled than you to analyze an art style. So it doesn't necessarily need to be their art style, but it can be get help analyzing an artist or an illustration. The reason for that is that this artist or an artist that's more skilled than you can look at a painting and analyze it a lot better than you because they have more experience and they understand how they do things a little bit differently than what I know. And I did this really, I took a mentorship program with Xiao, and we looked at League of Legends art style, and we did an illustration of League of Legends, even though it's not really her art style, but because she's a lot more skilled than me, she was able to look at an illustration or look at the style of League of Legends and analyze it and pick the main things from it, and we were able to study it and really learn from that style. Now, all of that being said, the concept that your art style will eventually find you is actually, based on learning the fundamentals. The reason for this is that if you don't have a good foundation, you will struggle, finding or having an art style. I'll give you an example. When I first started, studying the foundations and the fundamentals can be very boring. We all want to create these really nice paintings and fancy illustrations. And I was the same. I really wanted to draw like Ross Strauss or Wolof or League of Legends artists. So what I did was I, started the Ross Strauss Digital Art Bootcamp. And, he would post, a couple hours of lessons on a specific topic. And it would be every other week or so. And I would try it, learn and follow the process very well. And I would be able to do a decent job, following the process and replicating that style by going through it step by step. But then very soon, and I realized that when I came to do my own thing, using my own process, using my own painting, I really struggled and I couldn't really translate anything that I've learned from that into my own paintings. And I understood that it was because of lack of fundamentals. I couldn't really, do anything other than copy the steps that I was watching. So this is really when I had to take a step back, start working on the fundamentals. I know it can be boring. I know learning the box and rotating and these things can be, very boring if you only focus on that. But I think it is very important. And I think if you really want to find your art style and if you really want to excel at art and make your art style very unique to yourself, it's good to do, focus on the fundamentals and do all of the things that I've mentioned above alongside studying the fundamentals in order to, gain the most amount of, experience while developing your art style the fastest way. Now, if you want to know what to focus on when you want to learn the fundamentals, you can watch this video here.